realizing that even though I'm pretty familiar with how we use those dollars here in Rochester, I'm about to learn a lot about formulas and the technical way, because the devil is all going to be in the details. But I appreciate, Madam Chair, the support the board is going to give me, because that will be we have to report to the legislature by October 2026, and so it will be a significant draw. But the board also has said, as part of my goals and review, that they want Rochester to be playing a significant role in the state policy efforts that impact us. And as a district with a significant number of students who live in low-income families, this is a big deal for us. So I will certainly keep the board apprised. We have our first meeting in very early September.
Great. Thank you. Can I just comment on that?
Please do.
I think that as a member of the legislative committee, it also aligns with some of our legislative goals. And it's something that we've been actively advocating for, and it has come to fruition, and seeing you on that task force is even, I think, more helpful to RPS.
Yeah, it'll be great to work with the legislative committee on that effort as it moves forward.
All right, let's move on to our consent agenda. Items 5.1 through 5.12 are on the consent agenda. Would any board member like any item removed for separate consideration?
Move approval.
Second.
It has been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The consent agenda has been approved. And we'll move on to our focus topic, which is the graduation rate analysis and overview of ninth grade on track.
Oh.
And we have the sound.
There we go. Just as my colleagues Angie McAndrews, our Director of Positive Behavioral Supports, and Dr. Peter Ruck, our Director of Research and Evidence, come join us. As board members know, we try to schedule an update for the board as soon after we receive a data set from the state or the federal government or our own analysis as possible. It doesn't always fit the board's calendar. Graduation rates in particular are a data set that requires quite a bit of work at the state level, because it's at that level that you find out where kids who left a district ended up. And so this is the opportunity we've had to schedule for the board an update on our most recent graduation rate data. As the board also knows, we are trying, whenever we schedule one of these reports on the data, to also talk about what we're doing to improve our outcomes on the data. And so there's a lot going on within Rochester Public Schools around helping all of our kids succeed as they move through the grades and graduate on time. We've chosen tonight to focus on one new initiative that we've spent really almost a year planning, and that will go into high gear this fall, that's focused on ninth grade students. And so we're going to get an update on the numbers and an update on the launch of that new effort that is only weeks away from going live. So Peter and Angie, thank you, and we'll turn it over to you.
Well, good evening. Happy to be back before you this evening with even more data on student outcomes. So this evening we have sort of a two-part presentation for you. The first part's going to focus on outcomes and a little bit of statistical analysis, which I don't get to talk through frequently enough, so I'm looking forward to it because I used to teach it. And then we are diving into some of the upcoming stuff for four-year graduation rating. I just went through my previous slides, totally throwing me off the screen.
Oh.
Statistical analysis is the joy of life. People who don't agree are folks who can come speak with me cordially. But it is, it's great. Part of why we do it is it provides insights into how our operations are going and how our students are performing with a degree of scientific certainty that simply looking at a data set without any statistical analysis would not give us. And I'll go into a little bit more what I mean by that. So on the next slide, I have an analysis of the factors that change the odds of graduation. They affect the odds of graduation in 4 years for students based upon characteristics that they have in their first quarter of ninth grade. The statistical procedure here, the goal is to be able to say, given everything we know about this kid, if we hold all of that constant, what's the impact of this one thing on their odds of graduation? Does that make sense? And so that's where we use a procedure called binary logistic regression. The reason I mention that is not to be all jargony. The reason I mention it is because binary logistic regression is a procedure that requires the use of what's called a reference category. So in the next table, for example, you will notice that the student race or ethnicity white is not in the table. That's the reference category that we used. Generally, one uses whichever the biggest group is in terms of numbers as the reference category, and then other groups or service statuses or whatever it might be is then everybody else that's reported. So we contractors, that's to remove them from consideration. The last bullet point I'm going to keep, or last number 5, art and science. That's why I haven't been replaced by AI yet. Statistics still, yet. Statistical analysis it's as much an art and a science, and it's about knowing when the numbers converge in a way that you can be confident in the results. This analysis, just to produce this table on the next slide that you see, yep, right there.
Yeah,
Oh,
watch.
back one, sorry. I can do it. Yeah. Thank you. Just producing this one lovely table was about a month of work on my part. It was with a few random days in there devoted to other tasks. Doing statistics analysis well and making sure that you're confident in the results takes time. It wouldn't take that long next time because a fair amount of that was extracting data. But nonetheless, it's more time consuming than folks think. So on this slide, you will see all of the different characteristics of students that we tested to see whether it changed the odds of graduation. So you've got the condition on the far left. The second to last column says significant question mark. If it says no, that was not an item that appreciably impacted the odds of graduating from one of our high schools in 4 years. If it has a 3 stars and a yes, that means that it was very impactful and a change in odds and the margin of error is given in the middle. The only one that has a cross symbol is Special Education Services. If we were reporting this as science findings, we would say no, not significant. It's because it was just on the border of a minor factor, and I know it's something that we spent a lot of time delving into that still seemed worth reporting, but even that was really a borderline. As you can see, by far, the single most impactful characteristic that a student can have in the fall quarter of 9th grade to predict their on-time graduation is participation in any school-related activity. Doesn't matter what it is. If they are in something, it increases their odds of graduating by about 140%. Improvement in the odds, the baseline odds. Now, a good question is, can you add up the odds and see the cumulative impact? The answer to that is no. Using this type of statistical procedure, you can't add items together. All you can do is say what the separate impact of each individual item would be. Can I create a formula that would factor in all of these items and spit out like a risk score or something like that? Yes, that's absolutely doable. But that wasn't the purpose of this project. Other than that, it's what you would expect. Housing instability, very much associated with a drop in the odds of graduation. Low income status, measured as free reduced lunch. If you were proficient on your 8th grade MCA in reading, you were way more likely to graduate from high school. Infractions dropped it. 90% attendance for the entire school year. I'd have to look up how many days you'd have to drop below for it to be under 90%. Is it 18?
It's
18.
like 17.6.
And then, interestingly, it wasn't an F in English, math, or science. It was an F in anything that really popped. That was heavily predictive. So moving on to our graduation rates. Graduation rates in the state of Minnesota are a lagging indicator, meaning we are just now talking about the class of 2024. The reason that that is the case is because it takes time for the state to tabulate how many students and where they ended up, which relates to some of those numbers at the end. Our graduation rate has largely been stable between 85 and 90% for some time. The students who did not finish fall into 3 categories reported by the state. 116 continuing, those are students that can be something like a student who's in rail and is continuing an extra couple of years. It can be a student who maybe missed a credit or two and literally will finish it over the summer. Stuff like that can factor into the graduation rate for students who are listed as continuing. Dropouts are those that we actually recorded as officially dropping out. Our dropouts are disproportionately male students, students who identify as Black or Latino, students who receive ML or housing assistance services, the factors that we've discussed before on this item that haven't changed. And then the unknowns, that is a student who stopped showing up for school with us and never showed up anywhere else in Minnesota within the time frame of analysis. So that can be students who moved out of state, never told anybody. There's all sorts of reasons, but they are genuine unknowns. We do not know what happened to them. We have no record, and neither does the state. The graduation rates over time for our classes from our various high schools. You know, this is pretty hard to see on the screen, but it is included in your the board agenda items so that you can reference it as well. The Rochester Public Schools rate on the far right is relatively stable over time. You can see some shifts in some of our other schools. I can't speak to any demographic changes in the MnSync secondary population. I haven't looked at that specifically. As for ALC's rise in graduation rate, I spoke with a couple of folks down there who said it was really focusing back on in prior years, they were still dealing with a lot of lingering pandemic effects, kids that missed substantial school. So some of this is they've really gotten back to, had a good 4 years of ALC, and a deliberate emphasis on tracking credit attainment and getting students through that. Beyond that, I don't know that I could speak to more details from the ALC. I'd have to turn it to them, but I do know those are in place. A demographic category, you can see the graduation rates here. An item to note, these are all percentages. Some of these groupings of students have very few students in them. For example, other Indigenous peoples students, which is a new code in our system as of 2023, we only had, the rate there is 0%. We only had, I think, 3 students who fell into that grouping. Not like that's explanation that's satisfactory, of course, but it is important to keep in mind that with some groups, a small shift in headcount can account for a large shift in the percentage. For other groups, you know, that's just it. We have hundreds or thousands of students. By service status, again, relatively flat over time, depending on the status. A notable increase in our EL student graduation rate, however, and we've had quite a bit of work. That, I will turn it over to Kendrick.
All right, so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the Freshman on Track initiative that we are working on. I wanted to kind of back up to last spring just to give you a review of how we got to where we are today. So in the spring of 2023, there we go, there was just kind of a general, There was just a general curiosity about a program coming from the University of Chicago and the Network for College Success that focused on something called the Freshman Success Framework. And at the time, I was still the principal at Kellogg, and our high school principals were exploring this, but I had sat in on a couple meetings discussing this data with some interest about how the 8th grade experience and success maybe impacts how students do at high school. And so Dr. Ruck and Dr. Pickell had talked about looking at our own conditions and seeing if alignment existed, and in fact it did, and that was what Dr. Ruck was sharing at the beginning of this presentation. So there were quite a few indicators that we saw that connected, that showed significant success, increase in success and likelihood, and the one that really stood out was the extracurricular activity participation, and then also the 8th grade MCA score as a predictor. So then during the last school year, we spent some time meeting with representatives from the University of Chicago team and our RPS lead principals, exploring what this could look like and what, how we might get ourselves trained up to understand the methodology behind this work. And after a few meetings, our principals had committed to building out teams to attend the Freshman Success Institute. And then we also had decided that our community schools would partner with Cradle to Career to do co-design that would really look at gathering student and parent voice in terms of what they see as indicators of freshman success. And through that work, they had identified some themes and barriers, and so I have those listed there. Student motivations, support systems, personal agency and advocacy, teacher and staff motivation, and attendance were all things that were brought up during those conversations during the co-design. And then this summer we did the deep dive, and we took a team of 15 people to Chicago to participate in the National Freshman Success Institute. We formed teams at all of our buildings, and those included a variety of teachers, administrators, and then we took Peter Christofferson as our data guru to come along for the ride and help us make sure that we were making sense of our own local data as we did this work. We kicked off the week learning of our learning by hearing from the Cradle to Career folks who hosted our co-design, just to kind of prime the pump with the student voice at the forefront of our thinking as we left for Chicago. And then we attended the 3-day institute. There, our learning was just aligned to really specifically the Freshman on Track framework. And then what we found as we learned more about that framework is that it really aligned with the observations that we were seeing based on the information that was provided during our co-design. During that 3 days, we focused really specifically on the transitions that happened from 8th grade to 9th grade, making sure that 9th graders will have a strong start. We also talked quite a bit about attendance, agency, and investment in the educational process for our 9th graders, and then early intervention, so talking about actionable data that'll help us get the results that we're looking for based on the indicators we know to indicate or to predict that success. And then we talked a little bit about our team structure, and that's something that we still have some planning to do in the coming days. So our next steps really are to reconvene that team in August, and I think it's next week that we pull that team back together. And during that time, we'll talk about what the structure of that team work will look like, and actually defining on track. We'll use some of those indicators that you saw that were predictive of that success, but also specifically looking at how we'll gather data on grades and credit attainment. Especially prior to the end of a grading period, it's important for us to know how students are progressing before we get to the end of the period so that we have an opportunity for that early intervention. And then aligning our grading expectations to support those early interventions. And then working with Peter's department to make sure our dashboards are ready for our teams to use that data actionably. And then the National Freshman Success Institute is actually a 5-day institute. So we do the first 3 days of learning during the summer, and then they send us back to do 4 or 5 weeks of work, and then we go back to Chicago. And at that time, we'll be able to go and actually see the Freshman on Track work in full force in Chicago schools as examples. So we'll do the first day observing the process in other schools, and then the second day we'll be talking through our progress and any hurdles or dilemmas that we're experiencing here locally. I wanted to just clarify, talking about the grading expectations. I think when we talk about grading expectations, it's really important that we have clear processes and expectations in place in our buildings, specifically so that we have timeliness of grade reporting, that we are using the data to target students who are at risk, and then also to inform students and families about their progress, because we want to make sure that they know how their child is progressing also. And I think the important thing to me was just making sure that we saw this kind of crosswalk between the data that we looked at locally, what the research from the University of Chicago said, and what our co-design pulled out from our students and families that were participating. So the co-design really showed us that each of these components overlap. So specifically, students who are engaged, are attending and invested in their learning. That's fortified by a strong start and solid understanding of expectations and places that kids can turn for support during their freshman year. Making sure that we have adults to check in with students makes a significant difference in their attendance and their engagement. And students who are engaged can see a pathway to the future, so they show up, they work harder, and they perform better. When they perform better, they graduate. And we see this as not only an initiative to enhance graduation, but also to improve attendance, and which is the reason that we have connected this so tightly with our attendance pilot that we're running for the state. And we also hope to improve engagement by getting kids more invested in their education and the success during their freshman year and then subsequent years. And I think that's it.
Superintendent.
Thank you, Peter and Angie. Board members, if I could just take one step back and sort of maybe house this work in a little more of a conceptual frame. And of course, I look at Dr. Marvin, who was a high school teacher. High schools in the United States still, despite decades of thinking about them differently, do have a certain element of a factory model in them, in which we put students into a relatively large building, even where we have smaller spaces like the Alternative Learning Center here in Rochester. It still is bigger than many middle school environments and certainly elementary schools. And we really expect them to navigate it on their own. And what Chicago public schools first found and made dramatic progress over 30 years was that that's a recipe for kids who may have been relatively on track in middle school and elementary school, getting severely off track and not recovering. And so the core idea of ninth grade on track is that you are watching those students like hawks and engaging them with relationships and supports, and you're intervening early. Because many efforts to raise graduation rates were focused on 12th grade. They were focused on kids at the end. And that needs to happen. In fact, I'm looking forward to talking with the board about a new effort we're also launching next year to re-engage our students who have disengaged from school, those students who have, I don't usually use the term dropped out, they have left school, but we're launching, and Willie Tipton is going to be leading that work for us, so we never give up, and we never will, but the great insight of this work was you need to start as that student is going into that very, very different environment. And Peter shared the fascinating research analysis that he did of these predictive factors in RPS. And I think there's a lot for us to learn from that. The thing about the BAG data, or behavior, attendance, and grades, is that it really is a flashlight. Those are early warning indicators that help us identify those students in their first semester of ninth grade who are at risk of being off track. So while we know, for instance, that a student participating in a sport or a theater production in ninth grade, as Peter's work showed, is associated with being more likely to graduate on time, we don't necessarily know which students we most need to connect to that until we really know those students, until we see that. And so the BAG data is really an early warning system. And in Chicago and elsewhere, they have connected those kids not only to academic supports when they've realized, for instance, they don't read well enough to do high school work, they've connected them to relationships. When I was doing this work 20 years ago in St. Paul, where we had a serious graduation rate issue and made some good progress, we surveyed all of our high school students. We found out that half of our ninth graders at the end of ninth grade said nobody in this school would miss me if I didn't come back next year, and I don't have anyone in this school I can go to with a problem. I will never forget it, 48%. By the end of senior year, it was 89% said if I didn't come back, somebody would miss me and I have someone who could go to problem. Well, what happened? First of all, we lost some kids along the way, but eventually kids find a place to connect. There's great staff in our schools, our kids are resilient. Eventually, fine. But the problem is you can't wait for them. If you're a fragile learner, you can't wait for them to find that teacher, that coach, that activity, if they are likely of getting off track. So the big insight of that ninth grade on track work is don't wait. And of course, I'm pretty sure every middle school person out there is saying, yeah, we need to start in middle school and in elementary, and that's true. So there's a lot we're going to be doing at those levels too. But this ninth grade work really is saying this is a student who has just crossed into a fundamentally different learning environment, and we need to have a different level of support for them. And so as Angie mentioned, she was our principal at Kellogg when we were having these discussions, and we looked at our graduation rates. First year I was here, we had good gains, and then that year we had about a 10% decline, and this year we've gone up a bit. And as the principals and I and others got together to talk about that year, that cohort, and you saw it in the data here, where things didn't head in the direction we wanted, that led to this discussion of starting earlier, because a lot of the discussion was about what are we going to do. And there were compelling stories of our principals could identify individual students who were so close and who made a decision to go work full time, or who just had more credit recovery to do or summer school to do. And so this is a story of not at all shifting focus on those kids at the end of the spectrum, but being more intentional about them right from that moment in ninth grade. So thank you for letting me kind
Could
of
I add
a little of
one
that.
more thing quick? One thing that was different about our data, other than the extracurricular piece that was pretty substantial, was the 8th grade MCA reading score being a predictor. That was not the case for the University of Chicago. In fact, while we were at the National Freshman Success Institute, they had indicated, despite educational outcomes for students in middle school, they were not predictive factors in 9th grade. But we really need to make sure, and we've talked to the people at the National Freshman Success Institute about the importance of us using the extracurricular involvement in the 8th grade reading MCA scores, because we do see not only are those are they statistically significant, but they are very statistically significant here. And so that is a little bit different. I have appreciated the fact that where we started with this project was looking at what does our own data tell us, because lots of times it's easy to look and see what model they're using, but if that doesn't mirror what our experiences are here in Rochester for our kids, then we want to make sure that we're fine-tuning that and making sure that we're looking at the right indicators.
I think final point, Madam Chair, it is important, and Peter didn't do the disclaimer, so I will. That finding is a correlation, not a causation. So it's not that putting any kid in any extracurricular raises their chance necessarily by 134 percentage points, because it could be that kids who are just really engaged in school are also more likely to participate in extracurriculars. We think there's some causation there. We know the kid has, but we also know we don't want to suggest that extracurriculars are, despite the fact that we have an activities director here, that they are the magic bullet, but we think there's something there. Same thing with the 8th grade, the 8th grade MCA score, all of those things. But those are important because they start to take us to solutions. We don't want to just admire this problem, especially for our kids who are most likely not to graduate on time.
All it tells us is how strongly two things are associated and what the likelihood is that the association is due to random chance or whether there's something there. But beyond that, you need a theory of action and a theory-informed, evidence-based reason to explain the story. And that's where the research comes in.
Director Barlow.
Thank you. Excellent presentation. I have probably 3 questions in total. I'll just mention this once and then refer to it as BLR, binary logistic regression. So I was curious in terms of student condition, why sense of belonging perhaps were not one of the items listed.
So we have panorama results at the individual student level. The reason that we did not use individual student panorama results is it's a self-report survey that hasn't been validated against any type of rigorous testing to tell if it's a good measure. And so we'd be introducing a highly subjective measure that is often based on how a kid happens to be feeling that day into, and also something that we only have data on about, would only be, it's only about 2/3 of the students at high school that. So not a factor in this analysis, but with 5 essentials, we plan to.
But didn't you do your first year analysis that showed exactly what Director Barlow is saying? You looked at the panorama data and the belonging was predictive of...
Yeah, as a whole, the belonging, correct. Yep, thank you for reminding me of that. I can't believe I forgot that. Yes, the first year we had our panorama data, and I can see the slide in my head now that we're talking about it. We looked at the statistical relationship between those scale areas, the overall sense of belonging, the overall sense of school safety, whatever the other one was, and how that improved the odds. Mm-hmm. That was substantial at that point. It didn't include some of these other factors. We could certainly do that in the future for sure.
Second question, was there any reason under continuing students, was there any reason were GED students included in the graduation rates for 5-6 year students?
I am not an expert on when a student becomes eligible for a GED program. I know there are a lot of rules about that. I don't know that I could speak to it.
My understanding historically is that the state of Minnesota would calculate that in the analysis they run after the cohort, and so that kid would count. An RPS student who left us but got the GED should be counted as a graduate, even though they got their GED independent from us. Far fewer kids take the GED than used to, but if the state process is working effectively, and they usually get that from workforce centers and other places, then in theory, that person would be credited as a graduate, even though they didn't graduate from Rochester Public Schools. But we'll look into that. It's a
Just
good
a
thing.
question.
Yeah.
But it might not necessarily be counted in the four-year rate, because it would depend on when they complete their
It would
GED.
depend.
You don't become eligible for a GED program until you're not eligible for high school.
Okay.
It would, yeah.
I actually don't think that's true. Like, we have some kids who are so credit deficient that it's not likely. So they aren't necessarily not going to be able to graduate with their GED in 4 years, but it would be difficult.
Yeah.
Okay, then final question at this moment deals with the freshmen on track. Just a belief in my end. Most of the student condition and also new term bag data would ring true also for our elementary and middle schools. So why are we waiting until freshmen to address a problem that we know statistically is already in existence before they even hit ninth grade? And maybe long-term, we plan on doing that. I'm just curious as to, just want to bring out the light and maybe hear if that's under consideration.
Well, I actually think when Freshmen on Track and the Freshman Success Institute at their inception was specifically around the outcomes that the University of Chicago is finding within Chicago public schools for freshmen. But since that time, they've actually expanded and are now piloting some programming around middle school and elementary school on track. So identifying like what those predictive factors are, and how they might be able to put some early indicator warning systems in place to help catch them sooner, to keep them on track.
Yeah, I mean, we know that if by third grade you're not reading proficient, then that sets into motion certain things. So I think that would ring true as well. And it seems like you're already aware of that. Thank you.
But I'm sure it's a powerful point, Director Barlow, and yes, the student engagement and early warning systems need to exist at elementary and middle. Part of the genius of starting in ninth grade, and I say this as a former high school teacher, every level has a human tendency to say, we wouldn't have this problem at our level if the people upstream had done their job. And it's never that simple, but it's to a certain extent true. And part of the genius of the ninth grade was you have the privilege to serve these ninth graders, whatever their level of preparation, in your school. And so you can't just say, if we would fix the middle school or the elementary school, we're going to shift the ninth grade. But you're absolutely right. We have some very exciting things going on in our middle schools around student engagement, early warning systems. The attendance work has a strong emphasis on middle school. We have not finalized plans because we're looking at the finances. As you know, until very recently, we didn't know if we're going to have a big budget cut due to the federal decisions. We are likely to pilot small group intensive tutoring in our middle schools this year, which is something I've been very excited with a focus on math. We got to make sure we can cover that cost, but that would be a powerful academic and relational support, and we would pilot that at middle school for exactly the reason that you highlight. And I think for sure within a couple of months I'll be able to let you know. It has to do with where our federal title funding and our state compensatory funding from the allocation for this year is ending up, and we think it's going to be possible to do that, but we should be able to land that plane in the near future.
Thank you.
Although, Superintendent, I think we would be remiss at this point in the conversation not to again reiterate that just because we're focusing on this in ninth grade doesn't mean we're not focusing on factors in middle school and elementary school that we've talked about in the implementation of our strategic plan, in our mental health supports, in our academic MTSS. I mean, MTSS is really this, starting in kindergarten. So, just because the spotlight is on this today, let's not forget all the other work that people are doing, because I don't want anybody doing that work thinking that, we're prioritizing this over other work. Director work.
So I guess what I'm seeing with this chart is it's impossible to land on one single variable and say, if we only fix this, the problem would ninth graders would all be on track
There
always.
is no magic bullet.
Because there are so many things, some of which we can control, some of which we can't control. But it seems to me that a student who is proficient on reading in 8th grade is going to more likely feel better about themselves because they can read, they can comprehend, they can understand the material. Therefore, they're going to be perhaps less likely to drop out, unless there's another factor that interferes with that, like, you know, are they homeless, or are, you know, low income, or something else? You know, and so how can we, as a school district, make sure that we, I don't want to say look at all these factors, but take into consideration that there are those things beyond our control that we can't, you know, it won't get fixed during the school day, but what can? And the students who are maybe more likely to be proficient in reading in 8th grade, they're going to feel better about school. They're going to feel, oh, I'd like to participate in some extracurricular activities. So it's really hard to say which is first, the chicken or the egg, and you have to have both in order for this to succeed. But one of the things I really appreciate about this kind of data is that it really shows to us where we can make improvements and what are we doing well and how do we approach, as Director Barlow mentioned, dealing with some of these issues at a much younger age, which we're already engaged in. Thank you, Chair Nathan, for that. So I think it's just a really, I find that I don't necessarily understand all the statistical stuff about data, but seeing it in this kind of format, I feel as a board member really gives me a lot of information for how we can improve our system so that all of our students can succeed. It's not easy, but doing something well has never been easy.
I think the only thing I might add to that is just to call out one particular item you mentioned, which was the intersectionality of multiple barriers at the same time.
Oh, thank you for stating it that way. That was exactly what I meant.
And that is reflected here.
Yeah.
You know, you're never going to find one kid that only checks one of the boxes in that long list of items that we test on. They don't exist.
Dr. Marvin?
I'm grateful that a number of you have pointed out how the work that you're doing now already is informing the work that's going to be done in middle school, and specifically in 8th grade, you know, talking about grading expectations and attendance and that type of thing. Because you're absolutely right, we don't blame middle schools for sending us some 9th graders who just aren't ready, but back in the day, 9th grade was in junior high, and we weren't seeing the kind of challenges with those kids that we're seeing now. So anyway, I'm excited about the work you're doing. My question is, can you, with the data that you have, I'm impressed that you know how many kids aren't participating in extracurriculars. We know that's really, really important to their success in school. Is there any way you can do correlations to figure out why this number of kids or these particular kids aren't involved? Or is that going to take the kind of work that Mr. Ruffin has done with the Perspectives Project and just asking them?
Quantitative analysis like this is really good for forming a theory, or it's really good for testing a theory. It's not good for forming a theory.
Okay.
So to form a theory, we need to go do some qualitative data work and talk to our kids and listen.
Okay, thank you.
Director McLaughlin?
So I should explain, just first of all, thank you for the bag reference. I did not understand that in any way. I was like looking at this picture. Now I get it. Thank you. And I want to give a little bit of context for the reason I asked a bunch of questions kind of behind the scenes about this is that my prior work in my work life was probably what we would call freshman not on track, that I was in the juvenile delinquency system and seeing 9th graders come in and they were not attending, not learning, not participating, and I would see them in 9th grade and think, we need to fix this. And then I would continue to see them throughout their high school. They would drop out, they would do different things, they would not graduate. So wanted to put some context about that. But that relates to one of my questions that I added in the document we can share with you. Is mental health or chemical health? Is that something you can track, or is that something that we can include in this or not?
Historically, we haven't had systematic data over multiple years on those items that we could really rely upon. I think moving forward we will, with some of the really important work that Connie Grimsrud, Sarah Clark, folks like that have done with mental and chemical health. At this point, it's not a status that we track within Skyward that I could like drop into the stats model.
And then related to Dr. Mervin's question a little bit about the extracurricular activities, how does that show up in Skyward? Because I'm thinking about kids, like in 9th grade, they still might be in youth hockey, or they
Yeah.
might be in fencing in a different group or something else that they're doing
Really good
outside of
question.
RPS.
Fantastic, really important question. It is only those activities that are sanctioned and run by the school. So if there is anything with MSHSL or an officially sanctioned club or whatever that gets logged, but if it's an informal group of students, if it's a community-based team, we wouldn't have record of it.
Okay, so that could even expand that data. So
Well,
that it
quite
would,
possibly. and I
there
think
could be
some of,
more
like,
kids involved, and it would be even a
absolutely.
bigger number.
And I think some of our, some of the 21st century work that's gone on in our community, like a lot of that is speaks to exactly that phenomenon.
I made another note here. Now I need to understand what I mean here. One of your slides, the data slide has two different columns that I didn't, the change in odds and the give or take. Can you explain what that means?
Sure. So, for example, the way you would interpret the housing line item is holding all else constant. Experiencing housing instability is associated with a 41% decrease in the odds of graduating in 4 years, give or take 9%. The number of times I have been drilled to read that interpretation is crazy. It's telling you the stats model has settled and converged on 41% being its best estimate, but that anything plus or minus 9 from that is within the margin of error and should be considered just as valid.
Switching gears a little bit, talking about the student voice, the other part that I bring to this discussion and my interest in this is having a student who was in 9th grade when the pandemic started and how that impacted him. And the things you talk about involvement and that kind of thing, and what, how that stopped a lot of those things and how that impacted his graduation. But I guess my question then relates to, is there any thought to going back to students like that who have graduated but want to talk about their experiences to improve it?
There are, Dr. McLaughlin, so many reasons I would love to build a vehicle to connect with our graduates. Finding avenues for improvement is a great example. How are you doing? What are you finding out there in the world? How well prepared did you feel? What could have made it better? I will also say I think it'd be great for helping raise funds for their alma maters too, but that's not the primary.
At the right time.
Yeah, that's not the primary purpose. So I agree with you. That is something, we do not have that right now in RPS. There are some school districts that have done a great job of creating ongoing ways to be connected. I was just up in the cities and talking with an assistant commissioner who has been very helpful to us in our adventures with getting funding for P-TECH. And she and her father went to Washburn High School, and this weekend they had the 100th year anniversary of Washburn High School. And some famous graduates like the musician Jimmy Jam came back for it. And I said, how did you pull that off? And she said, because we have kept up the Washburn alumni connection for decades. So it was fun to hear about a place where they had invested in that kind of connectivity at the school level was there. So yeah, great idea for us to consider.
And then one of the things I added in my questions that I don't think you touched on is that, so thinking about the high school experience and the team that you're developing, and I love that work, but how are the classroom teachers going to know? What are you doing to educate them so that they can be part of this process without being part of the full team?
So there will be a regular team that's assembled to take a look at data, and then based on kids that they identify through the early warning system, they'll put in place interventions. So those interventions might be like connecting directly with students to ask them questions about extracurricular involvement. It might be identifying that maybe reading is their gap and figuring out what type of reading intervention might need to be in place for them. It might be attendance specific, and so we could look into, what the gaps are to getting them to school to provide those supports. I think the idea with the Freshman on Track model is making sure that we're looking at that data and making actionable steps forward for those students before we get to the end of a grading term, so that they haven't lost a credit and they don't fall behind. So it's really heavily focused on looking at that data in advance. And the teacher role in that would be, first of all, some participating on the team to look at the data, but then some of them being the interventionists specific to like the relationships or their content that they have established with those students or don't and need to establish them.
Do you see it as something that's already on the individual classroom teacher's radar, or is this going to be new to them when they come to back to school in a few weeks?
I think for some of them it's on their radar because it definitely has been a conversation over the last year, but I think the broad view of the initiative will be new to them as their principals roll it out during their back to school week.
And so just so I understand it, the team will take the approach to look at the data, and then if a student is flagged through what you call the early warning system, they'd reach out to the teacher and partner to help the student.
Right, and it might not just be teachers, counselors, social workers, nurses, equity
Whatever
specialists,
the
so
issue
yeah,
is.
a variety of people within the school system.
Awesome, thank you.
Superintendent?
Yeah, Director McLaughlin, the point about classroom teachers in this, their role is so critical. We know counselors have a key role, administrators have a key role, equity specialists in places, but if it doesn't touch the classroom, it really is missing the environment in which many students either make that connection and really embrace learning or check out. And a paradox that I've encountered is that sometimes the teacher with whom the student has a great connection, a fragile student, never knows that they are actually not going to other classes because they always come to their class. And so until you actually have the early warning system, and then I've been in those situations where they say, he's always in my class, and he's always, well, that person needs to know that this student is getting disengaged in other environments because they may have that connection that can actually be transformative. And that's where the early warning system, becomes really important to bring that teacher or that coach into the discussion and say, hey, you may not know it, but this student didn't earn a credit first semester 9th grade. That's not just, that's getting used to high school. They'll get it. No. That is a, wait a minute, you didn't earn a credit. And because, people are busy and have, high aspirations for kids, and so you can explain 1-0 away in a way that may be well-intentioned, but that could start a snowball effect, for that student.
Yeah. And I would add, maybe from a parent or just an observation perspective, it's not just being present there in the class, but engaging in the class. That if kids are a kid is engaged in a certain class with that close contact of a adult that can make a connection with them, but is not in the others, I think that's also something that I would think would be a red flag as well.
Dr. Whitehorn?
Okay, most of my questions got answered in this very thorough question and answer session. So my first question is those 55 unknown students. I asked because you did reference what a dropout consisted of, so I believe what you said is that they had enrolled and you didn't see couldn't find them at any other enrollment after they left, so they maybe verbalized that they were leaving, so we had some form of communication with them. What is the unknown? What does that mean?
So the students that are unknown, we likely didn't have any communication with them. They likely just stopped coming to school, and attempts to reach family or whatever were unsuccessful, and they did not show up at any other Minnesota school.
Okay, so with that, what differentiates the dropout from the unknown? Because it sounds very similar.
A student who is counted by the state as a dropout, I actually also don't like the term. I'm glad you mentioned it, but it is the state's term. They actually file the paperwork to withdraw, and we have a record of it.
Okay, so in mirroring just some of the things we've said here already, obviously the early warning, even the things that we're measuring, have probably been true for these students for the duration of their education. probably, you know, from early on, you know, being low income, you know, having housing instability, these things don't just appear, right? These are ongoing factors for the families that have difficulties with them. So I just mirror the thought that, you know, I'm glad we're doing something, but I need a little more convincing that 9th grade is soon enough. It isn't too late, right? Because we do have data that shows if they are better prepared earlier, that some of that data changes. And to Director Marvin's point, there are some districts that, because of these disparities and these issues, have changed their schooling model or back to an older schooling model, right? So there are still places where 7th and 8th grade is just one space, or 7th, 8th, and 9th. And I know that's a much bigger conversation, but it is something to consider if, you know, 9th grade is too soon to put kids into this bigger environment, or is there something we can do in that 8th grade to better prepare? So my personal experience was we had almost like a whole month of high school prep where, like, we kept going back and forth to the high school. We pretty much knew exactly what was going to happen on the first day of high school. So I think there are some ways to help these students. And then my last question is, do we have any data of the kids that don't even make it to high school? Because I've heard that argument as well. There are some kids that, due to the intimidation factor of high school, now I believe the young people say they're overstimulated, are not even making it, you know, not even showing up on the first day. Do we have any data? Is there a decline between who's leaving 8th grade and who's actually showing up 9th grade? So are we losing some kids there too? Because if that's the case, then Freshman on Track really ignores the kids who never can get, you know, who the high school experience is too intimidating.
I could speak to the 8th to 9th grade question at the very least. We do not lose very many students between middle and high school. There are absolutely school districts in this country where even the official dropout rate is an undercount because they lose so many kids in middle school. We're not one of those districts. So we don't lose a whole bunch of kids that go from 8th to 9th at any given point. Do we lose 0? I never say never in a district of 16,000 students, but I would say that would be the exception to the rule based on the data I reviewed.
I happen to be the attendance person too, so I can speak a little bit to this. We don't have, I wouldn't say the most significant number of our students that are 15-day drops, which would mean they have 15 consecutive days of absence. Most of them are not coming from elementary. Almost none of them come from elementary. Most of them don't come from middle. Most of them are coming from high school, specifically students 16 and older. I think the idea behind Freshmen on Track is not that no other grade matters. I think that we're doing a ridiculous amount of work at each grade and each building level to make sure that we're identifying what those early warning signals are, and that we're responding to those with interventions and with additional supports and differentiating our programming to meet those needs. The idea with the freshmen specifically is looking at a different model for how we look at that data and how we make that actionable. So trying to change that model a little bit to set kids up during that freshman year for success, because their success during the freshman year is a very good predictor of their pathway to graduation. So it's not that we are not looking at their academic performance or attendance or behavior, any of those other indicators in other buildings, but making sure that we're looking at it using that particular methodology in 9th grade and seeing if we can make some impact there. And then you had another question. I feel like I missed one of them.
But I do have a follow-up. So in the trend, I know you said that it's majority male, Black, Hispanic boys that have the recorded dropout rate. Were there any other trends with that? Are they dropping out at the beginning of the year? Is that, you know what I mean? Do we know? I mean, I know the obvious trends, but are there any trends that are fixable on this side of the table, right? Like we know what that trend is, but is there anything that can be done that, any data that's like, well, if we had these supports or if we did these things, that we can actually, any actionable item. Am I making sense here?
Yeah, I can speak to our specific 15-day drops. The other question that you asked was about transition in a 7-8 program, so I'll come back to that. I spent a lot of time this year looking at our 15-day drops, and that's actually some of the work that Willie Tipton's going to tackle this year. And I don't think that there's a lot of rhyme or reason to it. I think that, and in almost every situation when I would engage with those families, there was some sort of compelling story about what was going on. Sometimes it was a result of kids not feeling connected and engaged in school. And many times in those cases, we'd be able to get them back to school by making sure that we were having conversation with somebody in the school that could help address the concern that they had. So if a student wasn't feeling safe, or if they weren't feeling connected, if they were having issues with the teacher and leaving middle of the day and not participating. So there were a lot of those things that when they were school specific that we could intervene on. But the reality is a lot of them were other complicating factors too, about unmet mental health needs, and oftentimes families that weren't sure really where to turn. And we can offer support and guidance, but also we respect that there are times where those resources are beyond what the school can provide, and we can support that, but we can't get to the root of some of those the mental health concerns and some of the family trauma that kids are experiencing. So other than the fact that we see disproportionately that the kids who are 15-day drops are students living in poverty and oftentimes students of color, there isn't like a obvious pattern that helps us identify like how can we can be more preventative. And then to the transition question that you didn't specifically ask about transitions, but I wanted to just make a statement about this in terms of a school that maybe would just be 7th and 8th grade, or just be a couple grades and be able to focus on needs there. There's actually a lot of research to support the less we transition kids, the better off they do, so that they're able to learn systems and know who to go for support and what kinds of things are available to them, families and students within a school system. So we like to limit them on number of transitions. In fact, there are schools even just in our region who have gone away from some of those models because they see that those transitions are really difficult for kids to navigate, especially when you have like a 7-8 building or a 5-6 building and you have kids coming, they're either transitioning in or transitioning out every single year. And so the less we can do that, the better. So I think the grade system that we have established is good based on what we know developmentally about kids.
Dr. McLaughlin.
I'm sorry, I did have one more question that came to my head while we were doing the presentation. Dr. Ruck, the student condition of Latino is no, but the data for Hispanic Latino students' graduation rates is not great. Can you explain that for us?
When you account for all of the other factors in the list, the factor of being Latino was not significant. So what that means is, at least according to the statistical model, the student conditions that really were strongly associated with any given student finishing after you control for everything else are the ones that are listed there. If you only look at student race, ethnicity, or gender, or special education status, or whatever that might be, you're going to see some pretty big differences. But those individual characteristics, which is what the state reports on for graduation rates, don't take into account any other factors.
Got it.
And that's why we use the statistics model, is to try to separate out some of that noise so we can get a little bit closer to truth.
So if I understand what you're saying is that the Latino students who are referenced in the graduation rates likely have some of those other factors combined.
Yep.
Okay.
It gets back to that idea of there's no student in our district that's only one.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that.
I want to give you a chance to expand a little bit on this issue of what happens before high school, because as you've talked about the attendance initiatives, and it does sound like that we have a different kind of early warning system for our elementary and middle school students, because we're monitoring whether or not they're in school. Mm-hmm. And we're not just monitoring that data, you're doing extensive outreach to parents and families. Is it after a certain amount of days, or and the goal is obviously to get them to come back. So Is that am I describing it right? Is it a different kind of early warning system?
Let me just, before I let Angie give the real answer, let me free her up to be really honest. Madam Chair, we're putting that in place. It has not been in place adequately. In terms of that early intervention around attendance, as Angie mentioned in the update we did for you on attendance, we have over the last year done tremendous work to clean up the data set and the information systems to be able to identify that with precision. That's not to say there's nothing happening, but I want to be really honest. When I talk about our attendance strategy, I talk about it launching this year in a very concerted way. We're part of the state pilot. Year one for us really was understanding these factors we've been talking about tonight, putting in place not just the data, but the systems to inform people at the classroom and school level of which kids need intervention. Because, you know, if the data is sitting, I remember when I first started doing this work in St. Paul, we didn't have anything like the software systems, and the principal at Johnson High School, I can't believe she did this. She was a passionate educator. She wandered around the school with a list of the ninth graders who there was prediction they wouldn't graduate, and she showed them the list and said, "Do you know you're on this list? I care about you. I want you on." But she showed them the other kids on the list, breaking every data. She's retired now, so I can say that. And the kids usually are like, "What?" So I want to be really honest. It's not as though people haven't cared about attendance, but post-pandemic, I think a lot of us expected to return to the norm that existed with attendance. This is not unique to Rochester. And it is time to conclude that the good old days are not going to come back unless we put in place very different systems of both convincing and supporting kids and families that attendance really matters.
Yeah, and I would say, and all of that is very accurate, and I think that we've learned a lot this last year about how we look at our data and how we identify who are the students who have the greatest need, and then what our responses to them are. Our attendance coordinator that we've hired, Kate Morrow, is going to be working with our admin and clerical staff in the next couple weeks, making sure they're trained and understand like what the processes are that we're putting in place. But it wasn't like nothing was happening regarding attendance last year. Our buildings, one of the things I'm probably most proud of is that in every single building there's a regular attendance team that's looking at their data and identifying who those students are. This year we'll do it with we'll be able to prioritize those students, and we'll be able to speak more intelligently about where they're at in terms of their consistent attendance rate. And there are really clear processes at the elementary and in the secondary, but our hope this year is that we can enhance in-building interventions for students when they are dipping below that desired consistent attendance rate of 90%, and work on that student engagement at the building level before it becomes a truancy issue that involves the court system. We really would like to make sure that we're doing that work with kids, not that we're asking somebody beyond our school to do that.
And when I think about this list of student conditions, and I see that it's a 43% change in odds for attendance in high school, if we can keep them in school, in elementary and middle, we can probably start to address a number of these other factors before. I mean, to me, that seems to be the key, and why we're focusing on attendance is we need them in our buildings so that they can access our interventions and get that sense of belonging and establish their relationship. So I see these two pieces as the attendance and the ninth grade on track working together to achieve, all these outcomes.
Which is the reason the Freshman on Track is kind of our innovative pilot for our attendance work, is to identify how can we leverage that attendance metric, but to help us make sure that kids are successful long term. One of the big things that we're doing right now is some tier 1 things around attendance. So messaging, we have a couple videos that'll be going out at the start of the year. Our SRO, Officer Royston, is one of those in the video, and Dr. Brian Lynch from Mayo is another one, kind of sending the message about the importance of attendance. But I think we need to speak more clearly about it to our families and explain what is the mark that we're trying to meet, and how explain to them how important it is for kids to be in school. And so we're hoping that that'll be not to the point of being annoying, but maybe borderline, talking about attendance.
Director Barlow.
Thank you. I just had a brief comment. I, as a local pastor, recognize that it isn't the total responsibility of the schools to do everything, and that the community itself has responsibility, And as I sat here and listened, I would like to offer that I'm actively considering reaching out to other local pastors to convene a community discussion where we can share this information, gain community support. So there's no lag in what's going on and why, but everyone will have opportunity to know expectations because it's unfair, I believe, to, and I've been on the board for a number of years, to always reach this point of where we're looking outwardly instead of inwardly. And I know it's tough for staff and or superintendent to say, well, you know, and I'm willing to do that, and so I'm willing to offer to do an inward look and see what local pastors can do to encourage family support, because oftentimes we find ourselves speaking or referencing community need without necessarily having the true pulse point on the why. So just to put that in play,
Fantastic.
not really, there may be a need for the experts, if you will, to support that, but just to say that's what I
We'd
intend
love
on
to
doing.
follow up on that. It's a great idea.
Director Whitehorn?
And just real quick, I believe you mentioned when looking at the data that it's not to be added like together, but as the more we talk and we look at the data, it is kind of all right added together. You know, if I was a community member or parent looking at this and I fall into 3 or 4 of these categories, it could be very daunting. So I don't know where I want to go with this, but I guess my concern is that even though it's not to be added together, I feel that the people in these categories fall into most of all of these categories, right? Which would put your child in like a negative 200% chance to graduate, right? If you're falling into 5 or 6 of these categories. Can you better explain why it's not all added together if you meet multiple categories? Am I making sense here?
We'd be delving pretty deep into statistics
Okay,
theory
don't do
about
that.
how binary religious regression works, but I could. In terms of, but that's not to suggest that we're not talking about, like I think I might have mentioned before, the intersectionality of multiple barriers. That's absolutely what we're talking about. When I say they can't be added together, I mean that specifically in terms of the math behind the statistics. You just can't do that with history progression. In terms of the barriers themselves, absolutely. They come out.
But the hopeful point, Director Whitehorn, is that just as the accumulation of risk increases the danger of a kid being off track, the accumulation of supports increases their chance of being on track. The organization that I was privileged to lead for almost a decade before I came to Rochester, Search Institute, before I got there, the research we did was on developmental relationships, which is very relevant, but the work I inherited was on what they called developmental assets. And what they showed was that the more supports a kid has, including a kid facing extraordinary challenges, the more likely they were to be on the other side of this trajectory. So there's a hopeful side of that accumulation reality that is important, and it's one reason why everyone likes to say there is no silver bullet, which we know is the case, but that the more of these supports we can layer on for our kids, the more likely they are to be on the path to thrive.
All right. Thank you, board members, and thank you. We look forward to more updates.
Thank you.
The next item on our agenda is a monitoring item, staff development plan and budget review. And this meets a requirement in policy 425 that the district staff development plan be reviewed by the school board annually.
Thank you, Chair Nathan. I want to ask our Chief Academic Officer, Mona Perkins, to come up, our Director of Elementary Education. We have to get the titles right since we've changed it. Now Heather Clavetter, and Director of Secondary Education, Heather Willman. The only thing I want to say, board members, is that having a separate policy and a report on professional development as opposed to curriculum, as opposed to assessment, I think is in part, and I would guess Director Workman and Director Marvin probably had the same experience. Professional development was something we really didn't used to value in education. You know, an individual teacher could go to a workshop, and it was something that was not considered important to plan, considered important to invest in. And then when people say schools never change, this is one of those areas where I think there's been dramatic change over the course of my career. I remember being given my book, my classroom, and it's like, good luck. And now the planfulness that these leaders dedicate to thinking about professional development, or PD as we call it, is a complete paradigm shift from not that long ago. So I'm glad we have this opportunity to learn about the plans for the years ahead. No.
Thank you for having us. We are going to go through the PD, kind of the plan and the budget together. The one thing that we did tonight that might be a little different than what's been done in the past is we didn't just look at the dollars that were set aside specific for professional development, but we looked at kind of our professional development as a whole, and we want to report on the big things that we're going to be doing this year, regardless if it was paid out of PD dollars or other funding streams. So PD is defined as structured professional learning that results in changes in teacher practice and improvement in learning outcomes. One thing we've learned over the years, and research supports this, is that it's not a one and done. It's not about teachers coming in and sitting down for a quick PD session and then we expect them just to implement in their classroom. It has to be followed up with a lot of coaching and revisiting, and so this is all part of the overall plan.
I think this slide is just kind of reiterating that when we think about effective professional development, sometimes we think of that one session that you might take in room 26 and you go, you get that training and then you're done. But really, we're talking about collaboration, ongoing work, development of common assessments, vertical conversations, coaching, side-by-side work in the classroom, as well as some learning. So as we think about that, we just wanted to frame that in that broader context of effective professional development. And then we also wanted to just draw attention to the fact that if we're doing this right, you should be like, oh, this is really making sense because it's connecting with our strategic plan. So as you see our focus areas and our goals, that should really connect really tightly to the strategic plan.
And then on the next slide, you'll see our overall goals for the year. There are several of them, and as Ken mentioned, there's a lot of strategic planning being done to shape the development for our teachers. Number one, MTSS, as we've been talking about already tonight, is a huge focus, the multi-tiered system of supports. With a deep focus on literacy, we continue to have that deep focus there. Number two is really refining and continuing to sustain our evidence-based structured literacy practices, and that spans K through 12, actually early childhood through 12, that we're working on that and providing support and staff development. Number three talks about our alignment of standards. There are many state standards that are coming our way, some of them overlapping, and so we're working hard at that. Number four is enhancing student mental health supports. We also have deeper learning that you've heard about integrated into our curriculum articulation cycle, and so that continues to live through that. And then number six is about our language supports. There's a lot of deep work being done there in our Tier 1 instruction and in teacher collaboration, and then best practices for language acquisition and dual language instruction is another focus. And then finally, aligning our behavior supports in Connect classrooms with best practices as well. So these are many focus areas that we are doing this year. You'll see some of these areas are embedded into much of what we're going to share, like MTSS falls under many of these categories. It's kind of an umbrella for the work that we're doing.
So we'll just kind of go over the highlights of our upcoming PD and our PD budget. This is not an exhaustive list, so just so you're aware, we're not going to share every little key detail, and I think I already shared, like, This will include PD dollars, literacy aid dollars, and third-party billing dollars for special ed, and then some grants. So we're grading all of that to really provide some solid PD. So these are the buckets that we're going to talk about today. So we've got literacy that we're planning on spending about $760,000 on this year for professional development. Some work around we haven't landed on a name yet. We call them anchor or real standards. We're trying to really align the work K-12 within each of the areas. I did not include elementary science in there because we've got the elementary science implementations. I pulled those dollar amounts out to look at it separately, even though some of that work will also be the standards alignment. And we've got our math pilot, the student mental health, multilingual ed, and then special ed, and all of our other items. So those are kind of the big buckets.
Okay, so the first big one, as Mona had mentioned, is literacy, and we are budgeting $760,000, and part of that will come from literacy aid, and then others from professional development dollars. So many focus areas there. One of them being the READ Act training that we're providing to our teachers. We are currently in our phase 1 of that training, and phase 1 is supposed to be completed by next July of 2026. And then we'll be starting up our phase 2 training. That includes our 4th through 12th grade teachers. And we'll have an additional year to provide that training. We also are lifting off a pilot of the ESP, our Education Support Professionals Literacy Training through the state. We just had a training with our trainers today here to plan the schedule for that. And we have approximately 400 ESPs that will be engaged in that training starting on back to school week. Our elementary and secondary SPED curriculum will definitely be a focus, and there will be support with rolling out new curriculum and training along with that. Functional phonics and morphology is a curriculum we also purchased last year. In year 1, we focused a lot on the morphology pieces. This year, we're going to dig into Tier 2 supports within it, and so our 3rd through 5th grade teachers will be offered training in that as well. Along the lines of Tier 2 supports, we also have resource maps that have been developed by our literacy specialists and coaches, and so there will be some professional development about using all of those tools in our classrooms to support students. A new screener has been selected by the state called CAFD. That will be for our 4th through 12th grade students. It will be an additional screener that we'll be learning about. And then we'll be bringing some professional learning to our teachers to prepare for that. And the target date for rolling that out is winter. So we have some time to do that. And then we're going to continue to work on aligning our standards with our curriculum and making sure our teachers have support in rolling out the new curriculum. If you recall, Wit and Wisdom was rolled out in elementary last year. And there are many other areas across K-12 we're working on with curriculum revision. And then Mona already talked about the anchor standards, or the real standards we're calling them, which prioritize the standards. And we're working with teachers on which assessments will help to inform their practice in all tiers to support students too. So those are lots of areas in literacy that we're supporting our teachers.
I just want to add the READ CAFD. What that is it's the new dyslexia screener that's required by the state for starting in 4th grade. So that's why it's an additional screener. We didn't have anything specific for dyslexia screening once kids got past the foundational years.
All right. So we already talked a little bit about the anchor standards or the real standards. And we just wanted to make sure you knew that we're looking at identifying those and prioritizing those we already did in English Language Arts. So this year is really our implementation year at the secondary level. We're looking at what does our scope and sequence look like and how will we analyze our common assessments and look at student work. But then we're also doing that work in social studies and in science. So it's across the disciplines with the real standards.
Okay, and then elementary science, this year we're lifting off our Amplify Science curriculum in K through 5. And so there already have been trainings for our teachers in the spring, and then this year we have another training by Amplify, and then we're lifting off our own support of teachers in that. and so it will be ongoing collaboration and support. There will be some curriculum writing, because within our Amplify Science, as we know, any curriculum doesn't necessarily fulfill all of our standards, so we have some revision and writing to do there. And then just continuing to support our teachers in rolling out our standards with the new curriculum. Elementary math, I think I shared at a previous meeting that we're lifting off some pilots as we get to know our new standards. We're going to be trying out 3 different curriculums, and so there are 30 teachers that will be engaged in those pilots, so they will be getting some support there. It's approximately $21,000. Many of the vendors we're working with have given lots of the professional development to us for free of charge, and we're starting to lift that off next week already with those initial trainings.
We've got student mental health, and we've got about $24,000 there, and $10,000 of that is from the demonstration project grant, and so they'll be working on mental health screening, tiered interventions, brain-based readiness to learn, and universal mental health documentation.
Right, and then in multilingual education, as you know, we've been working really hard on co-teaching, and co-teaching doesn't just happen without training and support and collaboration time. So there are some dollars set aside for co-teaching teams in both elementary and secondary, and then translanguaging. So there's some professional development in translanguaging. It's a requirement for our multi-language teachers, and we also open that up for other teachers to be part of that. And that's $71,000 set aside for those pieces.
And as our newcomer programs kind of start to expand into other schools, we're expanding the number of teachers that are doing the co-teaching, so it's really important to bring them along and make sure that we've got some good PD for them, because we want people to feel confident and they need the skills to be able to support the kids. So this is really, really exciting work. And then in special ed, we've got a lot of work with our intensive programs, and then we've got dollars set aside for CPI and UCARO. CPI is, that's around de-escalation and restraints, whereas UCARO is more of it's an alternative to CPI. It's trauma-informed hands-off approach, and so that's used in more of our most intensive setting 3s and 4s. I added the de-escalation for gen ed teachers on this slide, but it's not, it doesn't really fall under special ed. It falls under special ed because we're really leaning on the special ed folks to help with the training, but that's for gen ed teachers. We always do some professional development for related service area providers so that they have stuff that's really unique to them. So OTs get what they need and speech pathologists get what they need. We did purchase a new literacy curriculum for secondary special ed, so we're going to be doing some PD around that. And then we just kicked off a big training for our Connect programs in early childhood through 8th grade. And they will be doing a lot of work with a board-certified behavior analyst named Wendy, who we brought in. She's incredible, and we just had our first kickoff with those buildings the other day. And that's really trying to look at behavior differently and work on our kiddos that are in the Connect programs. We want to get them really to engage academically with the, so it's not just all around behavior, and there's ways to do that. So we want to align our approach to behavior with best practices. And then we've got, we have about 11 teachers that are working on they're licensed teachers, but they have an out-of-field placement. And for reimbursement and all other things, we are going to partner with an organization called NOVA, who will help them through a portfolio process get their special ed licensure. And so we'll be working with, hopefully all 11 will sign up for that, and that starts this month as well.
And then we have some additional items that are actually basically on an annual basis that we fund through our professional development dollars. So the budget for that is $295,000 for this year, and that includes our new teacher orientation that we start lifting off next week, our back to school sessions that are offered for all teachers in all areas, not just teachers, certified staff. And then we have our school improvement plans. There's dollars attached to that, so schools can be working on the plans that they have, the goals they have for their sites, and do some professional learning around those lines. Every site has a staff development chair that helps to figure out their budget and make sure that it's aligned with their skips as well, and so that's something that we budget every year. And then we have our Winter Professional Development Day, that is February 16th, so we set aside funds for that for our teachers. The next slide provides the dates basically for all of those different items that I talked to you about. It also includes curriculum adjustment days. Those days, there are 4 in the year. The dates are up on the slide, and they are site directed and central office supported. And very often our sites are aligning those days, developing their teachers to support their school improvement goals. So those are the dates. I think that concludes our presentation.
Board members, any questions? I'd like to build on what Superintendent Piquel said about this is great to have this information, because to me, I hope the community understands that this isn't just an individual teacher building some individual skills, which is what it seemed like it was in the past. And sometimes they brought it back to their building, and sometimes it really was just a individual experience. But I really see the connections between what you've planned, not only in the teacher, but in the curriculum. I mean, this is where we're doing the material development and working through making the material useful, because as you've said before, especially with Wit and Wisdom, it's not useful just off the shelf. So I appreciate the content of this report to show us that. Director Whitehorn.
Just real quick, and I know we've talked a lot about the student mental health. I see that the funding is low. Is that I'm assuming that's directly impacted by some of the streams of funding that we lost. I guess my only question around that will be, what are our plans to increase that, as we know that that's an area where we need a lot of support. And I know we're doing what we can with the dollars that we have, but are there any more inventive ways, because it's a big issue, right? And all of this data we keep bringing up student,
Well, one thing to consider when we look at the dollar amount is where the dollars are going. So if you've got a classroom teacher and we need to pull them out, they'll have a sub. If you have mental health practitioners that need to come out, they might not necessarily need a sub. So some of these costs don't necessarily indicate it's less professional development. It just means there might not be sub costs with it or consultant costs. Does that make sense? Because there's actually a lot listed of what they're going to do. But my guess is there's just not a whole lot of subs that will be needed.
Superintendent.
Yes, and it's a very astute observation, Director Whitehorn. Our current strategic plan, which we're finishing this year, really put the emphasis on identifying the measures to identify kids who are struggling with mental health and putting in place the staff teams to do it. It has not had a major investment on professional development for staff who don't directly provide services to kids struggling with mental health. But that could potentially be a very important focus going forward. We've really been focused on the providers, our clinical social workers, our mental health screeners, our folks here, in really phase 1 of that work. When you think about the future of our mental health work, and next week we'll be getting together for our first discussion of the next strategic plan, one of the things that certainly as I've talked with staff here and staff in our schools, the idea that our general ed teachers, our special ed teachers, our ESPs could benefit from professional development on issues around mental health has come up repeatedly. So essentially we've focused initially on putting in place the measures and the experts, but so in the big picture, $24,000, it is not a lot, but you can see what it costs to do the literacy work. So I think it's a very important discussion for us to have going forward, because we say this about literacy all the time too, we can't intervene our way out of all these problems. We need to have classroom teachers, ESPs, understanding some of these. They're not going to be providers, but it's an important thing for us to be thinking about as we go into the next phase of the mental health work.
And just to clarify, so the question was behind, the reason why I related it to the funding loss was there compensation, right?
Oh.
So since we know that we lost all that funding, it didn't look well reflected that we were, you know,
Yes.
since we are not going to be able to do some of the things we had anticipated doing with mental health, I would be hoping that we would beef up, you know, the staff we currently have and give them the knowledge, even though we don't have the funding right now to hire the number of mental health professionals we need. It's still in need. So I just thought that would be a good space that we can invest in to kind of compensate for the loss of some of the things we originally planned for.
One thing I wanted to add, I was just thinking about how we haven't necessarily talked much about our instructional coaching, and I know that we have coaching and support that goes on is embedded into our days as well, and that's something we don't quantify in this because that doesn't cost us extra dollars other than having our instructional coaches. It's a huge part of how we do all of this because much of what is calculated, if we just talk about literacy, that's calculating when very often we need to pull teachers out so we can work with them, and that's going to be the sub-cost. But what's really beautiful is that we have coaches that meet with us with the focus on professional development, and they come with us every month to these sessions, and then they bring that to their sites, and that isn't an additional cost. So that doesn't show up here. And so there's much embedded staff development that isn't called out in this budget through our instructional coaches.
Thank you for the clarification.
Great. Hearing no other comments, thank you very much. So board members, to keep us on time, I have some recommendations for the next two prep for action agenda items. For the policy committee recommendations from the policy committee meeting on July 16th, I'd like to recommend that we skip reading the detailed briefing until our August 19th meeting. And unless any board member has any pressing questions about any of the policies and procedures tonight, we do have our Q&A document that is available for board members to ask questions. So I would ask if you do have any, please submit them in the next week, and then we will have time, the policy committee would have time to look at them and bring back some feedback on the August 19th meeting. And then we won't miss out on one of the weeks of our 3-week cycle of briefing policies. Does that sound okay with everyone? Yes, okay, great. Then I'm also going to recommend that we table the next item, the school board goal development for 2025-26 to the August 19th meeting, given that we have a number of action items and a closed session. We've already discussed the draft. The draft is available to you. It might give you a little bit more time to think about it and consider it, and then we can have our full discussion at the August 19th meeting, where perhaps we'll keep it as an action item and see if we can just do that all in one night. Does that work? So I need a motion to table this item to the August 19th meeting.
So moved.
Second.
It has been moved and second to table this item. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? We shall table it to the August 19th meeting. Thank you. So back on track. Our next item is an action item. We've reviewed this under prep for action at the July 15th meeting. And the resolution, I will read it and ask for a motion and second, and we'll open the floor for any additional information and discussion. Be it resolved that the School Board of Independent School District 535 does hereby approve a cooperative agreement between Mayo High School, Dover Eota High School, and Lord High School for girls hockey beginning with the 2025-26 season.
Move approval.
Second.
It has been moved and seconded. Are there any questions or comments? Director Whitehorn.
So I have one question here. Is this to be an ongoing co-op, or as the is this permanent? Is this just until numbers come up? I was just a little bit confused. I went back over that data, and it looks like at some point Mayo will have enough girls to have their own team, and it will still be Mayo's girls hockey, right? Even though it's co-op.
Superintendent.
We have our Mayo Activities Director, Dan Christopher, here. So Dan, correct me if I get that wrong. Co-op will be for 2 years, and so it is time limited. We'd need to renew it, and we would certainly be hoping at that time that there would be the participation numbers that would, enable us to. We'd love to have a team in every school, but of course that is not something that we control.
And I just have one comment. One of my neighbors, in fact, right across the street, they have two daughters who play hockey for Mayo. And over the years, since I've observed them over the years, you know, the commitment they have, the dedication they have, and I'm proud to be able to cast my vote in favor of this, because it would be a shame to deprive them of the opportunity to continue to play hockey when they've made such a huge investment, time-wise and otherwise, to support their local school and to, you know, be a great student in our district.
Superintendent?
I appreciate too, Director Ball. I just want to say, because I know that there are opinions on both sides of this issue, as there often are with the co-op. I do want people in the community to know that we very authentically did investigate with both our conference and our region the possibility of a co-op of our 3 high schools. It was unanimously rejected. Authentically, we pursued that for reasons that do align with State High School League rules in a definition of a co-op. But I want people to know we authentically did look at that option. I also would recommend the board approve this option for the reasons, Director Barlow, you just cited, but I do want people to know we authentically looked at that other option, as we would continue to do should circumstances change, but we can play these sports because we're part of a conference and a region. And so just as our votes on region and conference issues matter, the votes of our other school districts matters a lot as well.
Director McLaughlin?
Kind of piggybacking on Director Whitehorn's question, it was clear in my mind that this was going to be 2 years, but now that I'm looking through the background information, it talks about a minimum of 2 years under the state high school bylaws, and the resolution doesn't include that language, and I didn't see it in the presentation either, but I could have missed it. Is it something that we would entertain an amendment to the resolution to make that more specific? And then I guess the question is, what happens after the 2 years? Does it come back to the board for further decision, or how does that work? I don't know. I remember us talking about the lacrosse co-op, but I don't remember the time frame or if we revisited.
Superintendent?
Again, Dan, correct me if you need it, it would come back to the board. And so the 2 years we think is a prudent amount of time at this point. I think as you are wont to do, Director McLaughlin, as an attorney, you've caught an error that I would hope the board might be willing to fix by adding the 2-year time frame to the resolution.
Can I ask a question? Is that 2 years specified in the official form about the co-op that goes to the Minnesota State High School League?
Correct, yep.
So the actual document will say 2 years.
I would suggest, as the attorney, if we need to call that out, we either amend the resolution or include that document in our assembly so that people can reference that if they want to see the official language.
I will entertain whatever the board would like to do. I would, should someone want to amend the resolution, it could be amended beginning with the 2025-26 season for a 2-year period.
So moved.
Second.
It's been so moved and seconded. Any discussion on the amendment? Hearing none, all those in favor of the amendment say aye. Aye. Opposed? So the resolution has been amended to read, be it resolved that the School Board of Independent School District 535 does hereby approve a cooperative agreement between Mayo High School, Dover-Yoda High School, and Lord High School for girls hockey, beginning with the 2025-26 season for a period of 2 years.
Move approval.
Second.
Okay. So the new resolution has been moved and seconded. Any additional discussion? Oh, Director Marvin, sorry.
Further clarification, thank you, Dr. Piquel. There was a question too about whether Rochester was going to be paying for students from other schools or school districts. And the districts or the families cover the cost, including the sports fee. So it's no additional cost for us.
And I could, the other districts.
The other districts
Or
pay
the,
for
or the
their
family.
kids.
They're going to
Yes.
decide how to do
Yes.
that.
And the name of the team is representative of all the schools? Is that how they do that, or will it just be Mayo High School?
Yeah, what will we call, I
Is
mean,
it just
now we
Mayo High
always say
School's
like,
team, or is
Jam
it-
Century,
It'll still be called
just Mayo.
And I guess I'd like to comment, we did have some community feedback about this agenda item. I appreciate the support of the students. There was something else I was going to say about it, and I lost my train of thought. I think it's important for our students to be able to continue with this work that they've been doing over their youth sports, now transitioning into high school. But I think it represents a fair way to assist those students in continuing to play girls hockey here.
And I've also appreciated the feedback we've gotten from the athletic directors about the broader issue of girls hockey participation and your willingness to work with the youth leagues and the youth teams. One of the suggestions was even to have our high school players go and meet with the youth teams to show them that how much it's worth participating in high school hockey. So it's not that we're just signing a co-op and leaving it. There are still strategies that you're thinking about to increase these numbers so that we don't have to face these difficult decisions in the future. Director McLaughlin.
I got the rest of my train of thought back, thank you.
Okay.
I think what also was significant to me in the further input we got from the community is that these students have been playing together already and practicing now, that it's not like it's just a random combination of students who have never met each other, never played together, that they have, and that this is just continuing that effort.
Yes. All right, hearing no other comments, all those in favor of the amended resolution say aye.
Aye. Aye.
All those opposed? Thank you, the resolution has passed. Move on to our next action item, which is the approval of the 2025-26 student handbook. This is also an action item, so we'll read the resolution and see if there's any additional information and discussion. Be it resolved that the School Board of Independent School District 535 does hereby approve the 2025-26 student handbook, which will be accessible in a downloadable PDF format and available on the RPS website.
Move approval.
Second.
It has been moved and seconded. Superintendent, do we have any?
Well, certainly you all know that if you do have any questions, our lead on this, Angie McAndrews, worked with Jackie Peterson, but I think we're ready to approve this. There has been very good work done on this. I just want to harken back to the fact that this board had a very important discussion a few weeks ago about our discipline data and about the new strategies that we are launching this year with a positive behavioral supports team. And I want to note that in this handbook, it very clearly identifies the criteria for both in-school, out-of-school suspension, and that those criteria are quite specific, not so specific that they can't apply across a school district of 17,000 plus students, but that we take those criteria very, very seriously, that this board had that discussion of suspensions last month, not because there was a government agency forcing it to do so. It had it because we care about those issues. We are committed to improve. You have approved suspensions as one of the 10 top indicators that will shape our strategic plan and our school improvement process. And this handbook is our language on the page that describes how we expect our administrators to implement those suspensions with precision, and that we will continue to work. There was some discussion, as board members will recall, about the difference between level 2 infractions, where there is discretion in our current strategy by design. We want very tight implementation of suspensions so that we're sure that they are rare and that they're being assigned for very clear criteria, and that we are progressively restoring students to school in the unwelcome event that a suspension has to occur. So I know this handbook is a long document. One of the things that we've talked about next year is creating videos, websites, short ways to make it clearer to kids and families and staff what this handbook really means in practice. But the handbook matters. And so, Madam Chair, I didn't want to let this go by without underscoring the fact that we take the criteria: possession of distribution of drugs or alcohol, possession of a weapon or incendiary device, a level 2 events that results in bodily or emotional harm, or a major disruption to the learning environment. We take those criteria very seriously, and that other behavioral incidents, which are a normal part of growing up in adolescence for many kids, do not result in suspension and should not.
Since we're not going to have a presentation on this, I just want to compliment Angie McAndrews and Jackie Peterson and anybody else who has participated in this. I know you've worked with MSBA model student handbook, and it's, as you said, it's a long document, but I can already see we're doing whatever we can to make it all user-friendly. And I know that there were a number of questions submitted by board members or suggestions that I know you'll take into account before, making the final thing, but it doesn't substantively change any of the content. It's really just suggestions as to how it might be more readable or more accessible. So barring any other suggestions from board members, all those in favor of the resolution say aye. Aye. All those opposed? The resolution has passed. Thank you. Moving on to other business. The current version of the ABCD is available in the agenda item, and the upcoming agenda items for the next few meetings are being displayed on the slide. At our next August 12th study session, our focus topic is the new strategic plan. We will have a monitoring item, which is a report of the superintendent evaluation for 2024-2025 leadership component, and that'll be part 1, reflecting our closed session this evening. And then we'll also have a closed session that night, which will be part 2 of the superintendent evaluation for the leadership component. Then at the August 19th meeting on a focus topic, we will have the 2024-25 FastBridge data analysis and literacy plan update. A monitoring item, which will be the report of the superintendent evaluation leadership component part 2 closed session. A back to school update. We'll be discussing our school board committee assignments for the 2025-26 school year, the superintendent goals for 2025-26, and the approval of the school board goals for 2025-26 as we discuss tabling to the next meeting. Any other items board members would like to raise for consideration for a future meeting agenda? Hearing none, our upcoming dates, as we mentioned, just want to remind everybody that the August 12th study session starts at 6:00 p.m. and the next 3 regular meetings on August 19th, September 9th, and September 23rd all start at 5:30. The next item on the agenda is closed session for the superintendent evaluation for the 2024-2025 leadership component part 1. This is a closed session pursuant to Minnesota statute section 13D05 subdivision 3B, which allows the board to go into closed session to evaluate the performance of an individual who is subject to its authority. While in closed session, the board will engage in a confidential discussion of the scheduled annual performance evaluation of Superintendent Kent Packel. In addition, pursuant to Minnesota statutes 13D05, the board will summarize our conclusions regarding part 1 of this evaluation at the August 12th study session. Pursuant to the law I have cited, will someone make a motion to go into closed session?
So moved.
Second.
It has been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? The board moves into closed session at 5:53 p.m. Board is back in session at 7:47 PM.
The
Clerk Marvin, will you read the list of people present in the closed session?
members present were Kathy Nathan, Karen McLaughlin, Stephanie Whitehorn, Don Barlow, Julie Workman, Jean Marvin, and Kent Pical.
Thank you. And hearing no other business, this meeting is adjourned at 7:47 PM.
Thank you.